Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. Happy Tuesday, everybody. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It is a great day to be great. It's a great day to break down a Monday Night Football doubleheader, some sheesh, some utilization, some waiver wire, all that and so much more today. But I am not alone. Joining me, as always, the one, the only Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, Dwain "The Rock" McFarland. Hey, Dwain.
What's up, man? Another Monday night doubleheader. How about that? I really like this. I think I could get used to this. I would be good with this being the norm, even though it means we got to go back and, touch on a few more things the next day. But that also kind of makes this fun. Coming in on Tuesday, we got 2 games to talk about. Yeah, let's do it.
Just give me the 7 p.m., 8 p.m. start. I don't know who thought the 9 p.m. Eastern was a great idea. Hey, I'm not going to complain about watching football, but come on, just, logistically, what are we doing here? But let's go ahead and start with the early one, Dwayne. We had the Ravens taking down the Buccaneers 41-31. Baltimore covered as 4.5-point favorites in the overcast here at 51. And obviously, another incredible performance from Lamar Jackson, arguably playing at the best level of his career. Third MVP very much could be on the way after throwing for 5 touchdowns. Only 5 incompletions over there as well. So truly special there for La MVP, Dwayne. But really, it was more so the surprise of getting the player back in the good graces. Mark Andrews, 2 touchdowns. And don't look now, but he actually has more PPR points than Sam Laporta and even Dalton Kincaid. That is somehow a real stat. So, Dwayne, we back top 5 week in and week out. Or maybe did he get a little bit lucky because the Buccaneers kind of chose not to guard him?
Yeah, I think it's more the latter, but at the same time, it's like we want to root for Mark Andrews. Like, he's still a player that should technically be in his prime at the position, coming off an injury last year. But unfortunately, the role for him didn't really change in this game. So that's the first thing when I wake up after a game like this. Mark Andrews was the first name I thought of. I was like, okay, was he actually out there more? Was he on the field enough that we can depend on him moving forward? And the answer is, it's still really in the same role. 61% route participation last night. It was 60% the week before, 47% the week before that. So, Ian, I guess you could say there's a 3-week trend going in the right direction. He has been targeted a little bit more over the last 3 games. He's got a 16% target share versus only 12% target share on the year. But that's still not the Mark Andrews we were used to. We're used to having a guy that's out there 85% of the time, getting 23% target share. And man, wouldn't that be amazing this year in this offense and the way that they are rolling? So I would say, really, if anything, Ian, borderline tight end 1 is still where Mark Andrews is at. I think he could easily blank you if he doesn't come up with these touchdowns. I will say his utilization score over the last 3 games, which does give him credit for being the guy, getting the touchdowns and scoring fantasy points. It's a 7.4. And if you look historically at that data over the last 4 years, that would say low-end tight end 1.
Certainly a big boost. All those 2 and 5 fantasy teams that, were lucky enough to draft him in the early rounds a few short weeks ago. Otherwise, another king performance from the king himself, Derrick Henry, 169 yards on the ground, also caught a 13-yard touchdown. And guys, if you think Derrick Henry on the Ravens is cool now, just wait until we get him when it's 15 degrees in late December against a defense that quit on their team, 2 weeks ago. That is when the real fireworks are going to get going. Also, shout out Rashad Bateman, 4 catches, 121 yards, and a touchdown on 4 targets, continuing to look like a pretty freaking great route runner, particularly when he's finally not dealing with an injury. Will say, though, Zay Flowers dealing with an ankle issue. Had a lot of Twitter doctors saying it could be of the high ankle variety. Now, he did come back out there and play, but really was looking electric early on, and just after returning from injury, wasn't really getting fed the football much. So keep an eye on that as we go throughout the week. Sadly, Dwayne, not the only injury we had to deal with, though. Buccaneers really took it hard over there. Mike Evans with a re-aggravation of his hamstring injury. Caught a touchdown early, but sadly, as he was about to hole in number 2 from 24 yards out, dropped the ball and accordingly pulled his hamstring. So could be a multi-week absence for Mr. Mike Evans. Sadly, going to be much more than that for Chris Godwin. Dislocated ankle. He is expecting to miss the rest of the 2024 season. Really, really big shame, especially considering he was actually number 1 in the NFL with 50 receptions before departing. So Evans out, Godwin out. Dwayne, not good for Baker Mayfield. I think we got to adjust our expectations for this offense as a whole. That said, guys like Jalen McMillan, Sterling Shepard, even Trey Palmer, certainly going to be rising up the ranks.
Yeah, obviously it's a huge blow to Baker. I mean, another 29-point performance last night in fantasy. Like, Baker has been one of the best quarterbacks in fantasy football. Obviously, a lot of that hinges on the fact that you've got Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Could be without both of them, obviously without Godwin the rest of the way. So hopefully we get Mike Evans back pretty quickly. But last night, once Mike Evans left the game, it was actually Trey Palmer that led the team in route participation behind Chris Godwin at 80%. Didn't really do much with that. He's more of a vertical threat, so I could see him being the guy that they theoretically try to replace Evans with if he misses any time, the guy that you would get the down the field shots to. But it was really Jalen McMillan returning from his injury, which his first game back was last week, but they really just barely got him into the game with a 15% route participation. Last night, that was up to 60%. So it was really a rotation. You had some Jalen McMillan, and you also had some of Trey Palmer. But once we have Chris Godwin out of the lineup, I think that is going to mean probably Jalen McMillan in a full-time role. He's a guy that played inside and outside in college, made a lot of noise in training camp, even had a nice, opening part of the season, and then things just faded. He had the injury, got a little bit unlucky with that. So he did actually finish second on the team last night in target share behind Chris Godwin, or actually, sorry, third. The real winner here was Cade Otton. Ian, we'll talk about him in a second, but 18% target share. So if I'm playing in a deep league where I've got to do something at wide receiver, and there's nothing else on the waiver wire, I do think that Jalen McMillan would be the first name that I would lean to here. Then it would probably be Trey Palmer in the wide receiver room. I can't guarantee you, Ian, either one of those is going to do anything. I would put more of a chance on it happening for Jalen McMillan, but it was Cade Otton really soaking up all those catches. And man, I don't know, like if we can give like the toughest guy in the NFL award just after one game. But man, that right shoulder is very sore this morning. I mean, he took a huge hit from the safety, and then Roquan Smith railed him in it right after that again, forced a fumble, and then he gets hit. He didn't get hit in the shoulder again, but two more really hard hits. It just reminded me of the WWF or whatever meme, where it's John Cena, pulling off the belt. Every time Cade Otton was anywhere near the ball, like the whole Ravens defense was rallying to this guy. But to his credit, man, kept on playing. And really, he's a guy that it's interesting. He was pretty good at the end of last year. Prior to that, had never really been, much in the target department. But this year, I mean, he's set for a career high right now with target share. And over the last 3 games, he's at a 19%. His utilization score is at 7.7 over the last 3 games, 88% route participation last night. So I have a feeling that it's going to probably be Cade Otton as potentially the number 1 option on this team. Again, I think it's more spread out. I don't think he suddenly dominates, Ian, but Cade Otton's definitely in that low-end tight end 1 conversation. And in a year where, man, we're really struggling at the position, over the last 3 games, he's averaged 11.3 fantasy points per contest, which we would happily take in many of our fantasy lineups.
God forbid we see Baker keep on baking at least to 80, 90% of what he's been doing, Dwayne. And yeah, guys like Cade, guys like Jalen McMillan, maybe even a Sterling Shepard beyond them could keep it going. NFL high 18 passing touchdowns right now for Baker Mayfield and averaging his most passing yards per game since his rookie season. So again, not probably going to be as pretty without Godwin or Evans, at least for the next few weeks, but still Baker, really, really great start to the season. Let's talk about the other Monday night game, Dwayne. We had the Cardinals take down the Chargers 17-15 on a game-winning field goal. Cardinals obviously covered as 1.5-point dogs. The under did cash you at a lowly 44. So everyone, in Arizona having a pretty good time. James Conner had a great game. Obviously had that long catch and run. And, at the end of the fourth quarter to help set them up for success. Kyler Murray had a cool 44-yard touchdown run where he keeps doing this. The man knows he's going to score from like 30 or 40 yards out of the end zone. Absolutely incredible how fast he is. Everything's going great in Arizona, Dwayne, except for Marvin Harrison Jr. 3 catches, 21 scoreless yards on 6 targets. Had a big drop on the final drive. We got some cut-ups throughout the game with him not exactly separating. Wasn't ideal for a guy who, let's face it, has been quite a disappointment so far for fantasy managers who use either a round 1 or round 2 pick on him just a few short weeks ago.
Yeah, it's definitely been a pain. I will say this with Marvin Harrison, and I saw the cut-ups, and I've gone back and watched a lot of his film too, and I think one of the things I talked about, I know it's one of the things I talked about because I wrote it, was the fact that his separation skills deep were definitely lacking. But I also know that's something that we talked about, with him in college, but very good at intermediate, underneath stuff. And I think there's still plenty of opportunity there it was just more something to do with Kyler. I mean, and last night he had a 25% target share. That was actually first on the team, I believe. Let me check Trey McBride real quick. Trey McBride was at 25% as well. So those two, their top two players, surprise, tied for the lead in target share. You also had Marvin Harrison with a 42% air yard share. So historically speaking, like if you have those things, eventually things are going to click and they're going to come your way. So the good news is Kyler Murray's not going away from him. The bad news, Ian, is really that Kyler Murray stinks. Kyler Murray, again, 145 yards passing last night. The man is averaging 190 passing yards per game this season. He has reached 250 plus only one time, and that was in week 2 against the Rams when he had 266 yards. So here are his passing. Here are his outings: 162, 266, 207, 142, 195, 214, and 145. So, I mean, we've been down around 150 3 different times this season. This offense is not jiving with Kyler. I know people hated it with Cliff Kingsbury, but honestly, I think letting Kyler stay back all the time in the shotgun, keeping things spread out, might actually be better, for him as a player than some of the things. I get what they're trying to do, with Drew Petzing and the Cardinals, and they're still trying to do some of those things with Kyler, but man, it does not seem like this is working as far as a scheme that really can help Kyler thrive. So that's the thing that has me the most worried, man, because what's a 25% target share worth if you've got a guy averaging, 190 passing yards per game? The answer is not very much.
Not very much indeed. We got the targets. We're not going to be dropping them outside of the top, 30 wide receivers or anything, but certainly going to be far closer to that wide receiver 2 borderline as opposed to wide receiver 1 borderline that we draft them at. But remember, guys, this is a football game where one play can decide everything. And yeah, if you did catch that game, there was a good example of Marvin breaking wide open downfield for what could have, should have, would have been a 70-yard touchdown on a nice little sluggo route. Unfortunately, Kyler didn't see him, maybe because he's, 5'2" or something, Dwayne. So again, it wasn't ideal there. Our one true short king, though, Greg Dortch, did score a touchdown. That was fun to see. And then on the Chargers side of the ball, Cameron Dicker, the kicker, had a great game. Got me a win in one of my leagues.
Yeah, I heard you like kickers now, Ian. You
it's
do,
true,
yeah.
man.
Look at this. You've turned a corner.
Hey,
I don't know
as long as it works out for me. Yeah, it's true. As long as it works out for me specifically, I love him, but otherwise get out of my face with it. We'll say Justin Herbert, 349 yards through the air, throwing to a bunch of absolute nobodies out there. So yeah, it really was a good reminder of just how good Justin Herbert can be whenever he is in an offensive system willing to, throw the football. So not the best game from J.K. Dobbins, but still had rock solid utilization. And yeah, otherwise, Dwayne, I think that about wraps it up. So we'll probably get into more of these injury verifications as we go on throughout the show with our waiver wire breakdown. But first, guys, I want to do a quick rapid fire kind of news segment because my God, there was a lot of it on Monday. So kicking things off, at the quarterback position, Commanders QB Jaden Daniels, week to week with that rib injury. Dan Quinn did say he's hopeful we can play Sunday. Sounds pretty iffy, though, for the time being. Also, Tua Tagovailoa is confirmed going to be starting on Sunday as long as he doesn't experience any setbacks. Good for him. Brian Dable confirmed Daniel Jones is still the Giants' QB1, despite, the offense having 10 total points over the past 2 weeks. Free Drew Lock. Deshaun Watson done for the season as expected with an Achilles. DTR's finger x-rays came back negative. However, he could be out for at least week 8. Free Jameis. And also Raiders quarterback Aiden O'Connell to IR, will miss at least the next 4-6 weeks. Gardner Minshew or maybe a recently signed Desmond Ridder at QB in the meantime. Christian McCaffrey unlikely to play this Sunday. Shanahan said better chance after their bye ahead of week 10. David Montgomery's knee injury is not considered a long-term issue. Good news there. Shane Steichen said that Jonathan Taylor is expected to practice this week. Thank God. DeForest Buckner too. So maybe we see that Colts run defense take a bit of a leap forward. At wide receiver, strap in tight, everyone. There's some major stuff here. Lions wide receiver Jameson Williams cannot have a normal season. He's been suspended 2 games for violating the performance-enhancing substances policy. A man can't even take a low-grade beaver tranquilizer these days. 49ers wide receiver Brandon Aiyuk, torn ACL, MCL, maybe additional damage. He is done for the season. 49ers wide receiver Deebo Samuel, pneumonia in the hospital. Man, looks like he could end up missing several games potentially. We'll see what happens, but they have that bye after this week. Not ideal for Deebo. With the Rams, Cooper Kupp practicing in full, looking good for Thursday. Jordan Whittington not practicing, and even if he is good for Thursday, who knows if he's even going to play. Seahawks wide receiver DK Metcalf's grade 1 sprained MCL considered week to week. Also, Juju Smith-Schuster out with a hamstring injury. Braxton Berrios done for the year, and the Saints signed Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Kind of funny, Dwayne, this just came to me yesterday. MBS has gotten to play with Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes, and Josh Allen throughout his career, and now he gets to go catch passes from, Desmond Ridder in Saints practice. So, going to be quite the wake-me-up call. If that's been MBS with great quarterbacks, man, what is he going to be with a objectively bad one? Wait and find out.
Allen Robinson on full tilt when he sees this.
Unbelievable. Yeah, Terry McLaurin and DJ Moore like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
So, and then just a final note, guys, 49ers tight end George Kittle with a sprained foot day-to-day. So honestly, man, 49ers could be without Aiyuk, Deebo, Kittle, and obviously CMC ahead of this Sunday night game against the Cowboys. If the Cowboys still manage to get blown out by the 49ers in prime time coming off a bye, gotta think that is maybe good bye to Mike McCarthy. So we'll see. Plenty of time to get ahead of that, and plenty of more to get to on today's show. But first, a quick word to our friends over at Knockaround. Get my Raven shades on, because winners write the history books, as we know. Dwayne, hey everyone, head to knockaround.com and pick up your new go-to pair of polarized shades for less than $50. With over 25 frame styles and dozens of colors, you are guaranteed to find sunglasses that look good and protect your eyes with full UV 400 protection. And be sure to check out Knockaround's officially licensed NFL collection so you can rep your team all week and hopefully all the way through the playoffs. Visit knockaround.com and use code LIFE for free shipping on your order. Sheesh is right, Dwayne. The year of the sheesh, as some are calling it, and week 7 was no exception. Several categories to go through as we try to cover the beyond the box score, near miss, tilty moments that you all saw if you happen to catch the games, but if not, we are here for you to catch you right up. So let's start things off with the unrealized air yards leaderboard. Again, unrealized air yards, basically just measuring the distance thrown on incomplete passes, helps show the difference between, a near miss 50-yard bomb down the field versus a screen target that just hit the guy's feet. So really, Dwayne, the leader of the week, none other than Chiefs wide receiver 1, maybe at this point we can call him, Xavier Worthy with 127 unrealized air yards, 71 of which, man, could have come on a touchdown to open up that second half. So at this point, no Rashee Rice, no Marquise Brown, no Juju Smith-Schuster. Can we finally, Dwayne, trust Xavier Worthy as someone who should be fit in the lineups of most shapes and sizes?
Man, I don't know for sure, but I just had to show off these new glasses real quick. So these are the Pacific Palisades. These are so awesome, man. These are pier side. Check out the color. Looks like I'm hanging out by the pier. I think I look pretty cool. I mean, my wife would say probably not. I had to keep them on, just because like the light coming off of Xavier Worthy on the screen is so bright, even though we got nothing out of him, only 5.4 fantasy points. But yeah, I mean, I would say with Worthy, Ian, it's a step in the right direction. Like, I mean, at least there's something. Like, I guess the range of things we can have here is none of the underlying data and none of the fantasy points. Or you could get fantasy points and none of the underlying data. Or you could get no fantasy points, but the underlying data looks good. Like, that's the bucket we're in here. I mean, he had a season high 32% target share coming off the bye. So it does seem like they were trying to do some things with Worthy, get him some extra touches. Didn't quite work out in the box score, but hopefully they stick with it. Perhaps the injury to Juju Smith-Schuster forces them just to continue to try that again. So I think with Worthy staying in the boom bust wide receiver 4 range, but if he does have another week like this where we see a really strong target share, see a lot of air yard share, you have to think we will be moving him up the ranks. So hopefully when we see it next week, let's just put it out there. We're going to see another big week from Xavier Worthy as far as targets and everything, but this time he's going to come through with the fantasy points because, man, if he could get on a roll, Ian, this is a guy that could end up being a wide receiver 2 in fantasy. Yeah. Now, obviously, he's got to do that. Like, he's the player. He has to go out there and actually make all this happen. And he and Mahomes, they haven't been vibing yet. So this was a positive, though.
Again, guys, going through the Sheesh Report presented by Mike's Hard Lemonade. Appreciate our friends at Mike's. Xavier Worthy, week high, 127 unrealized air yards. Guys that also have more than 70 include Calvin Ridley, Jalen McMillan, Mason Tipton, Trey Tucker, Malik Neighbors, Cedric Tillman, and Garrett Wilson. So again, quite a bit of meat left on the bone for all parties involved there. Let's talk about some drop touchdowns. Dwayne's one of the Sheesher things that we can experience as a football fan or anytime better out there. And really some of the bigger ones of the week. Mike Mike Evans from 24 yards out. Obviously, we'll cut him some slack for hurting his hamstring on the very same play. DK Metcalf from 20 yards out, let it go right off the fingertips on that Seahawks opening drive. Keon Coleman from 12 yards out failed to maintain control of the ball as he was going out of bounds. Tank Dell from 10 yards out had a goose egg instead. Something named Irvin Charles for the Jets probably should have had a touchdown on a pass intended for Devontae Adams. That was a fun one to catch after the fact. And also Christian Kirk, Dwayne, failed to get his second foot down in bounds on what could have been a short 3-yard touchdown. Kirk's also had 2 other passes just legit hit him in the head in the end zone over the past couple of weeks. So really, man, I don't know why this keeps happening to Trevor Lawrence. Man, you got to start asking something about the common denominator there. I get it, but just realize Kirk could have, should have, would have had a much bigger start to the season. Let's talk about Metcalf, Dwayne, because as I said in the rapid fire segment, week to week now with that knee injury, who do you think benefits in Seattle?
Lockett benefits the most as far as like getting some of the targets that Metcalf was getting down the field. But again, Tyler Lockett has really been down in production over the last 2 years. The underlying metrics have also been down, struggled more against man coverage in these last 2 seasons. And really, we haven't seen much from him this year to say anything's changed. So even though they may schematically want to use him that way, it's like, I don't know, like, can Tyler Lockett still pull it off? I mean, he's going to get some extra chances to do so. Jackson Smith and Jigba, man, like, he has a ton of targets this year. Target share is like okay at a 21%, but because they pass the ball so much and their plays per minute, are so fast, like we just get a ton of plays from this offense. So I could see him picking up a few extra targets, and in a PPR format, Ian, when you're getting as many targets as Jackson Smith and Jigba is getting per game, I could see, maybe a brief span where he moves into that wide receiver 2 conversation. It's just really hard to get that excited for him. What I would love to see is, like, if for some reason with this injury they decided just to open up things for JSN a little bit more and show us that maybe they've been holding him back and not letting him work down the field as much. I mean, he's only got 22% of the team's air yards with an 8.3 average depth of target, but that's not terrible, man. We've seen guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Cooper Kupp be right between that 7 and 9 range for average depth of target and just light up the scoreboard. But something right now is not clicking with JSN, and my concern is he just does not have that athletic ability to really make those big runs after the catch plays and to separate in such a big way that would leave him wide open to get these really huge plays. That seems to be what's going on with JSN, but hopefully I'm wrong.
That's what I was going to say, Dwayne. What I would like to see is JSN actually look like the first-round wide receiver that he was drafted to be. Because, you said it, the target share, the air yard shares are not overwhelming, but when you are passing the ball as much as Seattle, it's added up in a hurry. 55 targets this year, Dwayne. That's tied with Stephon Diggs. That's more than Jamar Chase. That's more than Terry McLaurin, all in the same amount of games. I'm not even being a douchebag, including some buys in there. Still just a wide receiver 40 in PPR points per game. No, he's not getting completely fed downfield balls, but you know what? He has more air yards on the season than Jamar Chase and Stephon Diggs. Still not making the most out of it. So JSN would be a lot cooler if he got something going. Wouldn't exactly be overly expecting it. Maybe we see Jake Bobo, though, Dwayne, get some, desperate fantasy managers a bit of production out of the flex. We will see what happens there. Final category of Sheesh we wanted to get to, everyone, is going to be stopped at the 1-yard line and did not score on the same drive. The Eagles RB special, and boy, it was it last week. Both Saquon Barkley and Kenneth Gainwell registered these Sheeshes, only to go ahead and help push Jalen Hurts' tush into the end zone. Also having the Kareem Hunt twice on the same drive. Yes, he was that close to having an additional touchdown to his day. Breece Hall, Jordan Mason, Ronnie Bell, and the Steelers DST Beanie Bishop also qualified. Hell of a diving tackle from Devontae Adams to help stop that, pick 6. That wound up being a touchdown soon after anyway. So that was the Sheesh Report, guys, presented by Mike's Hard Lemonade. And yeah, just want to give a quick shout out to them as well, because fantasy football is here. And while that may be the cause for celebration, there will be some hard days ahead. But Mike's Hard Lemonade wants to remind you that hard days deserve a hard lemonade. So after a hard day spent scouring the waiver wire or concocting the perfect trade or tinkering endlessly with your starting lineup, it is time to quench your hard-earned thirst with Mike's Hard Lemonade. It's Tuesday, Dwayne, which means it is utilization report time, presented by the fine folks over there at DraftKings. So got some waiver wire goodness coming up, but first want to go through some of the guys you determine deserve an upgrade or maybe sadly a downgrade. Kicking things off with Giants RB1, Tyron Tracy.
Yeah, Tracy, he has Devin Singletary come back to this game. We hear that it's probably going to be a little bit more work for him, at least like last week from the coaching staff. They say, hey, he's earned it. And wow, did he earn it? He actually kept the lead role by a large margin. I mean, he had 67% snap share. He had 68% route participation. I mean, if you look at what we had with the carries, that was a little closer, Ian, 40% of the rushing attempts versus 33% for Devin Singletary. But yeah, this was a big step for Tyrone Tracy. Now, I mean, I want to caveat it a little bit because we did also hear the Giants coaches say they were going to ease Devin Singletary back in. So I don't know that we'll continue to see Tyrone Tracy as, I mean, the workload he had last weekend, Ian, was, that's a low end running back one. You would still like to see a little bit more workload like on the ground, but like how often he was getting used in the passing game, he was clearly the guy they wanted to have on the field. But I do think there is a chance that it still gets a little bit closer between the two, and we see Devin Singletary in his second game back take a little bit more. So I wanted to be a little bit more conservative with the way I approached the upgrade. I did move Tyrone Tracy up to borderline running back 2 status. So some people like to call that high-end running back 3, tomato. And if you look at Devin Singletary, I did downgrade him to low-end running back 3 status. So essentially it's just saying we can't trust Devin Singletary for the most part in any of our lineups right now. That could quickly change next week if they come out and they split this backfield evenly, but there's not enough reason to really want to risk that. So I would be leaning towards sitting Devin Singletary in most lineup decisions next week. Tyrone Tracy is really more on that borderline of he could be in your lineup. We don't have any buys this week, so it's not like you got to force Tyrone Tracy in there, but it is a situation where I would be leaning to him definitely over Devin Singletary if I was making the choice between the two players.
Also facing this TJ Watt-led Steelers defense this week. If you have another option, guys, really would go with the other guy. I know. Breece Hall had a big day against them on Sunday night, but I think there's a bit of a difference between Breece and these guys and the Jets offense and the Giants. Honestly, any offense versus the Giants, Dwain. 10 points in the last 2 weeks. They just had 119 total yards of offense against the Eagles. Looked incapable of protecting Daniel Jones without left tackle Andrew Thomas. But hopefully get another nice week of data under our belt, and then we can trust Tyrone Tracy moving ahead against some juicier matchups with the Commanders and Panthers. Speaking of that one running back, though, Breece Hall, Dwain, pretty great 2-week stretch going on here. Not exactly someone who we were ever taking out of the starting lineup, but it does seem like those top 3 heights that we drafted him for firmly back in his, not even potential, but expected weekly range of outcomes.
Yeah, I nearly made Breece Hall running back 1 overall the rest of the way, but then you just start looking at the rest of the running backs and what everyone's doing. You're like, man, that's saying a lot. We'll just say he's got top 3 upside the rest of the way. And of course, sure enough, after I wrote this, Derrick Henry did King Henry stuff again. And then you think about Saquon Barkley. You think about some of the other backs. We have so many good running backs this year at the top of our board, Ian. So he's in the range with those guys, though, because if we look since Todd Downing took over as OC 2 games ago, 85% snap share, Ian. That is elite. Attempt share, 83%, also elite. Route participation, 76%. You guessed it, that's freaking elite. And then target share, 22%. I don't know that sort of number is going to continue once Devontae Adams is fully integrated into the offense. Maybe if Garrett Wilson kept letting passes bounce off his shoulder pad into the other team's arms and essentially icing the game for the other team, you could see Aaron Rodgers sour a little bit on Mr. Wilson, but I think that number is going to come down. But the point being, Breece Hall's already shown us over the last couple of seasons, Ian, that he really is a high-end receiver out of the backfield. Doesn't get as many downfield targets as a guy like CMC, Kamara, those guys, but I think he's still going to do enough in the passing game is my main point here. I mean, the guy has a 9.6 utilization score over the last 2 weeks. That's higher than anyone else in fantasy football looking across running back, wide receiver, and tight end. So he does upgrade to high-end running back 1 territory. If you guys went out and made a trade for Breece Hall over the last few games, especially after that game, Ian, where he scored like 4 fantasy points, my son pulled off a master trade, traded away Jordan Mason. I can't remember what receiver. Rome Odunze and someone else to get Breece Hall after that game and Cooper Kupp while he was still injured. And so now he has Breece Hall and he's getting to put Cooper Kupp into his lineup. And some people are like, man, I want to play in that league. Yeah, there are some wild trades going down in that league, guys. I want to play in that league as well, but I'll just live vicariously through him because he's crushing it.
Love living vicariously too through our Discord, which you guys can go join for free over FantasyLife.com. And Dwain, I'll hear about some similar trades there. Get asked questions about it. And just one of my usual rules of thumb is if you can come away with the best overall player in the trade, usually not a bad idea to do so, as Camden went ahead and proved getting Breece Hall. So you mentioned it, RB48, RB36 finishes after a hot start to the year. Looked like Breece was falling off, right back in the good graces of everyone, though, with RB6 and RB5 finishes over these past 2 weeks. Certainly certainly don't need more than one hand to count the number of running backs you'd rather have the rest of the way, maybe overall players as well. So great stuff from Breece Hall, and great stuff from Browns tight end, and I guess just pass catcher number one, David Njoku. Dwayne, coming off a performance with 10 catches, 76 yards, and a touchdown on 14 targets. Might as well be 25 targets when we look at how the tight end position has been doing this year. So still not sure if it's going to be DTR or Jameis Winston under center in week 8, but either way, man, a pretty nice upgrading situation rolling out here for Njoku.
Yeah, in the last 2 games, 32% and 28% target share, the key factor being Amari Cooper moving on to the Buffalo Bills this last week. So I think we're probably looking at one of the guys that's going to have a high target share the rest of the way, might even lead the tight end position. Brock Bowers would like to have something to say about that. George Kittle, if he could get healthy with all these injuries to the 49ers, would also probably challenge for that along with Travis Kelce. But David Njoku is going to be in that conversation. The big question really comes back to what you just mentioned. Who is going to be the starting quarterback? We've got a finger injury to the throwing hand of Dorian Thompson-Robinson, so we'll see if he's going to be out there. But Ian, if we go back and we look at all the starts for Dorian Thompson-Robinson between this year, we'll that wasn't a start technically, but I took yesterday's game, then I took his other 3 games from last season, 46% completion rate. Okay, we're talking Anthony Richardson levels. That is not ideal, guys, and that is going to put a major damper on this passing game. You saw what happened to some of the Colts wide receivers. We'll talk about them in a minute with the return of Anthony Richardson. The real upside here lies with if somehow we could get Jameis Winston onto the field with Mr. David Njoku. I get it, guys. Is Jameis Winston going to unlock all these wins for the Cleveland Browns? Probably not. But let's try it and see. Let's see, because it's going to be fun, as you like to say, Ian. Jameis Winston is just a fun player to watch, and we know that he can come out here and throw for 300 yards per game. The ceiling for a guy like DTR actually might be, 175. We're hoping we could just get to that. So really does come down to who the starter is. In games where you've got DTR under center, I would say David Njoku is a low-end tight end 1. If you get a game where Jameis Winston is in there, he has tight end 1 overall ceiling in his range of outcomes for that week, and I would say probably ranking him as tight end 4 or 5 in any game where Winston is under center, and I think you could argue that I'm being too conservative with that.
Yeah, DTR dead last in yards per attempt over these past 2 seasons. Somehow, yes, even worse than Deshaun Watson. So please, free Jameis. Even if it's not going to help the real life team a ton, certainly would help us fantasy managers and, just general red zone viewers. So Njoku, tight end 3 down the stretch last season, Dwayne, after Watson was sidelined. Certainly seems like it's in his range of potential outcomes once again. One more upgrade for everybody. We have Steelers clear-cut wide receiver 1, George Pickens, coming off, 111 yards and a touchdown on 9 targets, even in a tough matchup against Sauce Gardner and the New York Jets, Dwayne. So Russell Wilson under center. Turns out he is, in fact, a better option than Justin Fields. I can't believe Mike Tomlin knows more about football than us. Who could have ever seen that coming? But talk about George Pickens and what to make of him now with Russ cooking, Dwayne.
Yeah, look, with Pickens, we've talked about him several times. Like, he's doing his part as far as like what the underlying data points are that we follow to help us understand whether a player is talented or not. You hear of the sacrificial X. Doesn't bother George Pickens. He's out there running these routes, still getting all the targets. He's got a 30% target share on the season. He's got a 51% air yard share. So those rank respectively 7th and 3rd in the NFL. So he's got really high marks in 2 of the key categories that we care about the most that are major drivers in the utilization score based off of the research that I've done. The big challenge, Ian, has been a run-heavy offense, a minus 6.7 drop-back rate over expectation. That's one of the lowest numbers in the NFL. And then Justin Fields and Pickens just weren't able to find that chemistry. Again, we were getting the targets to Pickens, but we weren't getting those big plays down the field. The big thing we saw with Russ, again, 1 game sample, but we saw more of the targets down the field, an average depth of target of 17.9 yards with Russ. And that was kind of the hypothesis some people threw out, is would Russ unlock some of these deeper shots like what we used to see to DK Metcalf in Seattle from Russell Wilson? And at least in 1 game, that did come through, and that led to 22.1 fantasy points for Pickens. That was his biggest outing of the year. It was hard for me to like massively move Pickens up the ranks because it's only a 1 game sample size. But right. I didn't want to do nothing, because we had moved George Pickens essentially down to boom bust borderline. He was sitting at the bottom of wide receiver 3 ranks because things were so erratic. And then the playing time, I will say, Arthur Smith can pull a rug out from under you at any moment. We did see a season high in route participation this last weekend, also from George Pickens, so that went his way. But we've also seen many games where they've got him out there 75 to 80% of the passing plays. And on a team that runs the ball a lot, that also introduces a major floor. So maybe those things will all keep moving in the right direction. It is a step forward for Pickens because at least now we have seen potentially him and Russ have that connection. And I will say that was more Pickens than Russ. Russ underthrew those balls and Pickens was making the most of it, but the intent was there. And that's the main thing we care about. That connection can continue to improve, but seeing the fact that Wilson was willing to throw him those balls, actually threw him a beautiful fade in the end zone right as we were trying to sign off from our Sunday night show where Ian was throwing a little shade towards Russ and George Pickens and they caught a touchdown right at that moment, which was a pretty awesome moment to be a part of, maybe one of our top 5 moments on the show. But yeah, Pickens upgrades for now, Ian, to that mid-range wide receiver 3 territory. But if we get another game like this, where we see that continued intent to get the ball down the field and they're not taking Pickens off the field, I think at that point, we move him up into that wide receiver 2 conversation again.
Yeah, what a freaking moment that was, Dwayne. Love just having my words completely thrown back at me. But you know what? That is what I do appreciate about football, and also kind of my love of UFC and MMA. Like, you do have these moments where you're just so clearly wrong based on what's happening that you have no choice but to accept it, Dwayne, and move on with your lives. So George Pickens certainly getting that upgrade. And again, Russell Wilson, kudos to him. Wasn't an easy matchup. Only took 1 sack. Did end up completing, I think it was 3 or 4 passes thrown 15+ yards downfield. Really was a facet of the Steelers offense that we hadn't seen for a couple weeks, and accordingly they scored their most points since week 11 of 2021. So good stuff there, and certainly could be another boom on the way against the New York Football Giants here next Sunday. Now, Dwayne, we've been going through a lot of good stuff, but we do have some downgrades to get to. Not 1, not 2, but all 3 Colts wide receivers. Yeah, certainly do deserve to be shot down those rankings as long as Anthony Richardson remains under center.
Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit more about Josh Downs and Michael Pittman here because I know those are the 2 names that a lot of you are probably considering. Should they or should they not be in your fantasy lineup? But like Ian said, it's a downgrade across the board to all of these guys. But if we look at Josh Downs and Pittman over the last 3 games, Ian, with Joe Flacco, man, they were really in a groove. Josh Downs averaging 19.5 fantasy points per game. He had an 8.4 utilization score, which is in the wide receiver 2 range. So underlying data was also supporting like what we were seeing on the field. And then Michael Pittman, we had averaging 14.8 fantasy points per game, and he had a 6.8 utilization score. But once we got Anthony Richardson under center, things all changed, and there were 2 really big drivers to this. Number 1, Ian, those 2 guys had 81% and 75% catchable ball rates under Joe Flacco. Those things immediately plummeted to 50% for Josh Downs and 60% for Michael Pittman. So just not near as many catchable targets coming their way. And then the other major component here is we look at the completion percentage there, 49% for Richardson, 66% for Flacco. But then we have the passing attempts per game, 24.3 under Anthony Richardson, 41.5 under Joe Flacco. So there's 2 really different game plans that the Colts have that they want to deploy depending on which quarterback is under center. And go figure, that's probably the 2 game plans they should deploy. They're leaning into the strength of which guy's under center, and so they want to run the ball more with Anthony Richardson. And even some of those dropbacks that you think you're going to get as passes, they turn into scrambles once Anthony Richardson is out there playing. So that's a major challenge when you have a big drop in completion rate and you have a drop in the number of passes you're throwing. It really plummets the value of both players. So now we're looking at Downs as being a mid-range wide receiver 4. I would say Pittman's really in that low-end wide receiver 4 territory, which means in a lot of lineups, you're not playing them. A lot of injuries around the league, so you may be forced to do it, but you're not going to be liking it, guys.
And that was before we even get Jonathan Taylor back in the picture, which again, hopefully does happen to this week. So really one of these games where, you know, we saw with the Eagles last week, just 14 pass attempts from Jalen Hurts, talked about with Kyler Murray at the top of the show. Colts certainly one of these offenses where sadly guys just can't overly rely on the group reaching even 150 passing yards during any given week. So those were the upgrades and downgrades. Now I'm going to get into some nitty gritty waiver wire goodness. But first, a quick word to our friends over at DraftKings. A chill in the air, leaves falling to the ground, and football every weekend. That is what fall is all about, and you can make each weekend even more exciting by getting into the action with our partners at DraftKings, the #1 place to bet on touchdowns. And right now, all new customers who bet $5 will instantly get $200 in bonus bets. All you got to do is download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and sign up using our promo code FantasyLife. The crown is yours. Again, that is $200 in bonus bets instantly, and you can stay in on the action and use your $200 in bonus bets best to bet anytime touchdowns on DraftKings. After all, DraftKings is the place to bet touchdowns. Sports betting is not yet available in your state. Don't worry. You can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use our promo code FantasyLife and bet just $5 on any wager. Again, that's promo code FantasyLife only at DraftKings Sportsbook. All right, Dwayne, let's talk some 49ers wide receivers in our waiver wire watch segment because, again, Aiyuk done for the season. Deebo Samuel could at least be missing the Sunday night matchup against the Cowboys. And despite it all, 49ers still the 8th ranked scoring offense in the NFL. So we know there's going to be some level of passing goodness there, even if it's a little bit less than usual. Who do you think could benefit most between Jauan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall?
Yeah, and I know that, our fearless leader, Nando, he put in the chat this morning, like, are the 49ers like the best team from an NFL history perspective of just being like next man up? And they come in and start producing fantasy points. Probably. I think it's pretty easy to say at the running back position for sure. I would have said that. But then this year, they've done it with Jauan Jennings already once. I mean, the dude.
Bro, Richie James on that Thursday night game
Richie James has done it. Yeah. So the question is, like, can these guys do it for more than a game? But with having Brandon Aiyuk out for the season, that's a big one. Deebo, we know is, look, get well, Deebo. That's hopefully just more of a short-term thing. We get him back sooner rather than later. But you mentioned it, George Kittle also day-to-day right now with a foot sprain. So there's going to be a lot of potential targets available to go around here. And Jennings has already shown us he can do it this season. We mentioned that 46.5-point outburst that he had a few weeks back whenever we didn't have Kittle or Deebo available in the lineup. And that was with Brandon Aiyuk out there on the field competing for targets with him. So he's sitting at a 6.5 utilization score on the year. Now, guys, that big score does count, but we can't take it away from him. Jauan Jennings did have a good game. He's also at a career high rate for targets at 24%. And we're into 6 games of the year. So, sorry, that's targets per route runs, 24%, and his target shares at 20%. So he is playing at a higher level than he ever has. Now, those are not like astronomical numbers, but they're pretty good. When you look at his utilization score, Ian, looking at the last 4 years of data, we've seen 22% of the guys finish as a high-end wide receiver 3, and we've seen 31% of them finish as a low-end wide receiver 3. So those of you at home doing the quick math, yes, that's 53% of the time he's been in that wide receiver 3 conversation. There have been outlier cases where it's more of a wide receiver 2. There's also been cases where it has been more of a wide receiver 4. So I would put his range somewhere in there, but you also have to realize that those target shares he was putting up was with more competition earlier in the year. If he gets a couple of games here where you don't have Aiyuk, obviously he's gone, you don't have Deebo together, and he's out there, he could do even more. So I would say he enters that wide receiver 3 conversation for these next couple of games, and he could surprise and be a wide receiver 3 the rest of the way. I would also say he's probably the favorite to be the wide receiver 1 on this team in the games whenever they don't have these other guys, and the favorite to be the wide receiver 2 once Deebo returns. Now, the other guy is battling is going to be Ricky Pearsall, their first-round pick. Many of us thinking, 49ers, why? Why? A luxury pick, because apparently Kyle Shanahan slept with the devil's wife or something. I don't know what is going on here, but to see so many people hurt, now you have Ricky Pearsall returning from the gunshot wound he suffered this offseason. It was his first game back in, and he saw plenty of action. He was out there with an 86% route participation. That's going to continue with all these guys hurt. He had an 18% target share, so not great. But this is a guy they like. They draft him as a first-round talent. I know Matt Harmon, from Reception Perception, he actually likes him a lot. Matt watches a lot of film. So this is a player that will be challenging Jauan Jennings. And would it surprise you, Ian, if he actually ends up being the one over Jennings that we want? It wouldn't me. I would lean to Jennings first, and then I would say Pearsall would be my second. I would be bidding on both players, especially if I have Brandon Aiyuk. I would be trying to make sure that I'm getting one of these players in my leagues. Jauan Jennings only rostered 30% of the time in Yahoo leagues, and whenever you look at Ricky Pearsall, this actually surprised me that he's even rostered 13% of the time. Evidently, yeah. So I don't know where that came from, but he's still available in most leagues. So these are guys, if you need wide receiver help, I think they are the top options this week, even though we can't say for sure if both of them will come through long-term for the season.
We also can't necessarily say for sure that Jauan Jennings is going to be out there. He did not practice all of last week with that hip injury and missed the game. So just with that extra little bit of uncertainty, Dwayne, would you actually prioritize Pearsall?
I would prefer to wait and see if we can get some information first. Like this is the challenge with writing these articles, like on, and getting them out by Monday. And I'm not complaining. Like we like getting it out there so you guys can have it. But sometimes you really got to listen to the information that comes out after you've read it to kind of determine that. So if we were able to get some good news that pointed towards some positivity with Jauan Jennings, I would keep him as the top guy. I also think if it's something where you're looking at it for the rest of the season, this is more of a rest of the season play, and you're looking good with no buys, you don't need to worry about it this weekend. I'm probably prioritizing Jennings first. If I'm just trying to be for sure and I don't have enough information tonight and I'm having to put in my waiver bid for a guy I've got to use next week, let's say Aiyuk was my wide receiver 2, I do think I lead in Pearsall. I put them both in the waiver wire tool over at FantasyLife, which people can check out. I put them both at 20% fab recommendation, so I had them even.
Well said, my friend. Jennings, by the way, still the wide receiver 21 on the season. Yeah, it goes to show you that 175 yards and 3 touchdowns goes quite a long way. Still ahead of George Pickens, DJ Moore, T. Higgins, amongst others. Let's talk through another wide receiver. Dwayne had himself a pretty nice week 7. Browns wide receiver 1, maybe. Cedric Tillman, again, not sure if we're getting the Jameis experience or DTR. That is going to influence just how high he goes up the ranks. But at a minimum, Dwayne, the second-year talent looked pretty good with his opportunities out there.
Yeah, he got an 82% route participation with Amari Cooper being gone, and then he had a 24% target share, which led the team for the wide receivers. Obviously, we already talked about David Njoku. He led the team overall with a 28% target share last week. But when you look at Cedric Tillman, Ian, this is a third-round pick out of Tennessee. He's only in his second season. So he's in that range where it could be time for him to take that step forward and flourish. And maybe they were seeing some things in practice that were already making them think, we can go ahead and get something for Amari here and we can move on. And that was probably part of why they were willing to move on from Mr. Amari Cooper. So when I look at Cedric Tillman, it does come down to the quarterbacks again. But right now, the Browns have told us that they prefer DTR as their guy. But what you guys have to realize is if DTR comes out there and just stinks it up for 3 games, or he can't play this next weekend and Jameis lights it up, at this point, I think the Cleveland Browns fans might actually be steering the ship because they've had to go through so much. I don't see in those scenarios how they could stick with DTR, and I don't necessarily see the guy suddenly turning into a 60% passer. So I'm thinking at some point, whether it's sooner or later, I do think Jameis is the one that ends up on the field. And so that's the thing you got to think about with a guy like Tillman. If you have Jameis and the style of player that he is, really a down the field, he can win these contested catch balls, he can get deep. Tillman is a perfect match for what Jameis Winston is going to want to come out there and do. Yeah, Jameson Williams. Wow. Talk about, the 2-game suspension still on my mind. But yeah, Jameis Winston with Tillman, that would make him a wide receiver 3, man. I would put him immediately in the wide receiver 3 conversation. However, knowing that we might have DTR for a little while in those games, I would say more of a boom bust wide receiver 4. So again, I don't think we'll know for sure on that one, Ian, until later in the week. But you got to remember it's in that range. But if you're thinking long term for the rest of the season, do you think there's a way they can keep Jameis off the field, Ian, knowing the struggles that DTR's had?
I'd like to think no. Dwayne, again,
I know, but we really don't know.
Yeah, I don't know where DTR getting to be number 2 QB last week came from. I would like to think with the finger injury and stuff, it goes to Jameis eventually, but we can only hope. I will say that throughout it all, Dwayne, it is refreshing to see Jameis has not changed 1 iota. I know, only 10 or 11 pass attempts this year, but already number 1 in terms of average target depth down the field. So same old Jameis. And it's worth remembering, man, as much as, yes, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin were the main beneficiaries of that magical 2019 campaign for Jameis, Rashad Perryman won a lot of people their fantasy championships with a hot stretch later in that year because Jameis is going to keep on feeding his guys through better and for worse. So, guys, those were the main waiver wire ones that should be available in more leagues than not. But Dwayne, as always, not available in my league, pal, is one of these situations that we have to deal with. So you wanted to go through 3 players who, again, are owned in at least, I should say, are available in at least 40 to 60% of Yahoo leagues. And let's start things off with apparent Raiders RB1 workhorse Alexander Mattison, currently rostered on just 46% of Yahoo leagues.
Yeah, so he's available 46% of the time. Okay, so rostered 54% of the time. So he barely squeezed into our criteria here, but we did see Zamir Wyatt return from the groin injury, and it was still Alexander Mattison as the lead back. Now, we don't know for sure, Ian, if that's going to be a situation where, like what we talked about with Devin Singletary, if they're just kind of easing Zamir Wyatt back in. But honestly, Alexander Mattison has just looked better than White this entire season. Whether you want to talk about rushing attempts, whether you want to talk about targets out of the backfield, Madison has looked like the more versatile of the two backs. So I have a feeling that this probably sticks. Now, the Raiders aren't an offense we're going to get super excited about, Ian, but this offense is really condensed around what? Two players right now, Brock Bowers and Alexander Madison. When we get Jacoby Myers back, he's going to be the third guy. So I think it's really those three players, and that's it. I mean, Trey Tucker's not really doing anything. They're not splitting up the carries that much. So, yeah, I look at Madison right now, and I upgraded him to low-end running back 2 status. You could make an argument. Maybe you want to be a little more conservative, call him a high-end running back 3. But, I mean, he had 69% of the snaps this weekend, 79% of the rushing attempts. Dude had his top utilization score of the season. He had an 8.3, so 7.9. over the last 3 games. You historically look at a 7.9. Again, 3-game sample. You look at a 7.9 and he manages to hold on to that. Typically, that is a running back 2 in most seasons.
18, 19, 26 combined carries and targets over these past 3 weeks, and admittedly has looked better than Zamir White this season, although that bar has not been very high. Talk about another running back, Dwayne. Steelers RB2, Jaylen Warren, but certainly usage moved in the right direction last weekend. Just from the eye test, I would say that game against the Jets was the healthiest he's looked this year.
Yeah, he had his best utilization score of the year at a 6.0, which is not fantastic, but that gets him back into that running back 3 conversation because we know how skilled Jaylen Warren is. This is one of the most efficient running backs in the NFL over the last 3 seasons. Haven't seen it to this point this year because of what you mentioned, Ian. Been dealing with that hamstring injury that got him all the way back in training camp, tried to play through it. Obviously, things weren't right, so they set him back down. But to see this game, the other component we have is no Justin Fields on the field, and that means more rushing attempts to be shared by Najee Harris as well as Jaylen Warren. And so he had 50% of the rushing attempts. That was a season high, and he had a 34% route participation. So this was also the closest thing to what we thought we might see on the season, which was closer to a 1A, 1B type of scenario with Najee Harris. Now, Najee still led the way in this game, but just to see Warren kind of tightening up the race a little bit here, Ian, I think that opens the door to a lot of possibilities. Number one, we know that Warren's good enough to be one of these kind of guys that he can just score more fantasy points on less, or he could play well enough where in certain games he gets that hot hand treatment, or maybe eventually they decide that he just looks better than Najee Harris. I want to give Najee credit, though. These last couple of games, he has been running hard, and I think that Najee has looked pretty good himself. Also had a really funny moment in his press conference yesterday. I can't say what he said, but you guys can go check it out. It was pretty hilarious. The one caveat I would give is we don't have Cordarrelle Patterson right now, and this is Arthur Smith. So now, and I know we've got the CPAT king of the CPAT fan club here with Ian. So I do think once Pat Patterson comes back, that poses a risk to Jaylen Warren, because we've seen Arthur Smith over the years be willing to use 3 running backs. So I couldn't get overly carried away with him, but it felt really good, Ian, just to say at least he upgrades back into that mid-range running back 3 territory. It's really more boom bust kind of range guys, but he'd been in the running back 4 range. So it's really nice to see that a guy like Jaylen Warren, someone we love, at least moves into an area where maybe on a bye week you can get him into your flex spot, and he once again offers upside if something were to happen to Najee Harris.
Could be a smashable little schedule stretch here for the Steelers as well. Giants, Commanders, Ravens, Browns, Bengals, and Browns for their next 6 opponents. So only other one, Dwayne, you had as the not available in my league, pal, Tua Tagovailoa. Yes, good chance he's taken, but if not, certainly keep an eye on him. Someone who is available in 55% of leagues. Cardinals, Bills, Rams, Raiders, and Patriots next 5 games. Looking good for an offense that, yes, dead last in scoring this year, but last year certainly was the greatest show on Surf, a group that we certainly wanted to get plenty of exposure to. So keep an eye on Tua if you do need that quarterback fill-in. Dwayne, let's get though to your buy low of the week. Bengals, RB1, Chase Brown.
Yeah, man. I went and looked at the trade market, and we use a lot of these cool tools that are out there. So fantasycalc.com, and then I look at the utilization score, and I look at really what's the range of outcomes for these players based on guys that have had similar utilization scores over the last 4 years, and then looking at the trade market, seeing what they're going for today. And Brown right now, Ian, over these last 4 games has taken over the lead back role for the Bengals. Now, Zach Moss is still involved. Zach Moss still getting some of that passing down work, but really most of the rushing attempts now channeling through through Mr. Chase Brown. He had a season high 60% this last weekend, and it also coincided with only 7.3 fantasy points. So those are the sort of things you want to be looking for. A guy doesn't really do what someone wants in the fantasy box score, but maybe their role actually got a little bit stronger. We don't have very many times in a year where those sort of two things align. And recency bias is a very powerful drug, and people will make moves that you wouldn't think they would make. So you want to check in and see what the local Chase Brown manager is willing to do on him. And I will just say, like over on fantasycalc.com right now, he's being valued similarly to Dalton Kincaid, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Austin Eckler, Rico Dowdle. I would take Chase Brown over all those players. I think Chase Brown has a higher ceiling than any of those players in the role he's currently in. And if his role were to expand and he suddenly got more of the passing down work and they started treating him like a 3-down back, and that could come through performance, that could come through an injury to Zach Moss. Not that that's what we want. You guys just have to remember there's a lot of ways that these things can change as we go forward. Man, the explosive playmaker in an offense that we really do like, that's not a combination that we have a chance to go make a trade for that often. So the way I would look at him is if you can make a trade for any sort of name like that and you need running back help, he's definitely a player I would be targeting. Right now, he's upgraded to borderline running back 2 territory. But man, he would offer running back 1 upside if his role changed just a little bit more. And to be honest, he could keep moving up the ranks, Ian, without his role even changing, because we've seen some of the big plays that he can hit. He just hits a few more of those, and his trade value is going to skyrocket. So I do think that now is the time to try to kick the tires on a trade for Chase Brown.
And that is everyone's homework for this week. Go out there, try to get yourself Chase Brown. We do not think you will be disappointed. But everyone, that is going to wrap up this edition of the Fantasy Life Show. We appreciate you joining us as always. We'll be back tomorrow with Dwayne and the great Chris Allen, breaking down the biggest questions ahead of Week 8. So for Dwayne, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.